Super Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, Kirby, Metroid. These franchises are all known and have been adored by gamers worldwide for generations. Nintendo, despite the claim that they make the same game every single year and never branch outside of a few series, have a wealth of game franchises and characters recognizable to even the most casual of gamers. Even the more obscure Nintendo titles, such as Kid Icarus or Ice Climbers, are now well known thanks to the likes of Super Smash Bros. And the like. In fact, it's pretty difficult to think of a Nintendo franchise that hasn't gotten at least a decent amount of exposure over the years. Yet even when it came out in 1990, Startropics felt destined to be one of those games to fade into distant memory. A game crafted by Genyo Takada, creator of Punch-Out!, Startropics sought to give the adventure RPG gameplay of Zelda a modern American twist, if you will. And while impressive in many ways, Startropics just felt too little, too bizarre, and too late in the NES's lifespan to really make much of a dent in the gaming market at all. So, what happened? Gamers control everyday American boy Mike Jones, who has traveled to the fictional Sea Islands in the South Seas to visit his globe-trotting archaeologist uncle, Dr. Jones. Nope, not the one you're thinking of. Upon reaching the islands, however, Mike learns that his uncle has, surprise, turned up missing, and coincidentally monsters have begun appearing all across the islands en masse. So, Mike does what every normal kid does. He takes his trusty yo-yo and sets off to kill these fiends and save his uncle, because that's completely plausible and isn't far-fetched in the slightest. As I said, Startropics tries hard to appeal to the American audience, yet it does so a bit too strongly. A hero with the plain name of Mike Jones, who fights with normal toys like yo-yos and baseball bats and softballs, lots of mentions of cola throughout. There is even a bit of a white savior complex going on, in that Mike and his uncle go to a foreign island nation and are the only ones that can solve the problems there. Some of this, incrementally, might not be too much, but when it's all thrown together like an all-American mixing pot, the recipe is just bland. It's less earthbound, which felt American-inspired, and more like outsiders doing their best American impersonation.
How do you do, fellow
Americans?
I think of it like older generations owning a toy company and trying their best to appeal to children, I suppose. But in truth, they really don't know what children want. Graphically, Startropics is certainly charming, with bright, detailed sprites and a world map that beckons gamers to explore its lustrous forests and coastal villages. When speaking with some characters, you even get these wonderfully made close-up scenes. It really makes the game stand out, and has that feeling of classic PC games of the time period. The standard gameplay is very much like Zelda, in which you explore dungeons and do combat from a top-down perspective. Dungeons here are much less puzzle-heavy than Zelda, however, with the way forward often blocked until all enemies in a room are defeated, or perhaps jumping on the correct block to make a switch appear. There are some invisible walls here and there, and the use of items to trigger an event, but these are much fewer in between than in early Zelda titles. There's some cool items that Mike can use to thwart his enemies too. As stated before, his standard means of attack is by flinging out his yo-yo, which extends just a few feet in front of him. The baseball bat covers about the same length, but hits much, much harder. The slingshot fires weak pellets at a distance, with a soft ball acquired later will hurl a powerful ball across the screen. Aside from the yo-yo, however, each of these have limited uses, and don't carry over once you leave a dungeon. That means you will always be relying on your go-to yo-yo for the vast majority of the game. What players may first realize when playing the game are the odd controls. Usually, when the player changes direction, the character will just move in that direction without pause. Here, Mike controls a little bit like a tank. If you're going to the right, for instance, and suddenly want to go left, or up, or down, the player first has to aim in that direction, and then hit the button again to get Mike to move. This double tapping the direction takes a lot of getting used to, I'm not sure I ever managed to get the hang of it. It makes some sense, as it helps prevent players from accidentally wandering into the path of an enemy, but it is extremely odd and makes some sections harder than they otherwise should be. This leads to my biggest complaint with the game, the punishing difficulty. Games from the 80s and 90s are famously hard due to hardware limitations and as a carryover from arcades. Gaming companies wanted players to be involved in their games for months on end to become masters of the title before reaching the conclusion, yet because games rarely could be as lengthy as some of today's 100-plus hour adventures, the difficulty was the most common way to stretch out that length. Some call these games Nintendo hard, due to how frequent it was on the NES, and Startropics is one prime example of Nintendo hard. A big factor towards this is that dungeons often rely on rote memorization from the player to complete. Case in point, often when entering an area, you will be in immediate danger, and unless you know what weapon to have equipped or which way to jump, you're going to at least take a hit. There are also numerous dead ends in these levels, tricking players into exploring a long series of rooms just to give them a paltry reward that is rarely worth going out of the way to acquire. The greatest sin of these difficult stages are the trap rooms that lead to a sudden and instant death. How was I supposed to know that going through this door would lead me to dropping into a lava pit unless I've played this before? This happens frequently as the game goes on, and it serves only to drive the player mad. I would only be mildly upset if death wasn't so absurdly punishing in this game, but after failing just once, you had best reset the game to the last checkpoint. Yes, Startropics does have a save system, and the game will automatically save upon entering a dungeon, so you won't have to start from the very beginning. Yet that is the only kindness done here. No matter how far you are into the game, no matter how many pieces of heart you have obtained, no matter what weaponry you have, when you die, you restart with only 3 hearts, and with all weapons, save for your standard yo-yo, gone. That's right, you have to fight monsters in hopes of getting more health and weaponry, which can take a grueling amount of time. For me, I just reset. It's just not worth the hassle of getting all of that just to die one more time to another trap I didn't know about. Not everything is about exploring dungeons, however, in Startropics. In between battling the evil monsters of these underground crypts, Mike will traverse the islands looking for clues, speaking with villagers, and solving complex puzzles. There are some great sequences here, such as following coordinates to locate a hidden cavern, or working your way through an intricate maze inside of a whale. Yet, as with all other areas of this game, there comes some frustration. For instance, in the very first village you visit, you are told by this guard that he will not let you pass because he doesn't know you. So how do you tell him who you are? Well, you have to speak to every other villager first. Then he'll know that you're Mike Jones. There's one infamous section where your robot partner tells you that he needs a passcode that is obtained by dipping the letter in water. Now you can scour the entire game for a letter and you won't find it. What Nintendo did here was include a physical letter in the packaging, and only by getting it wet would the secret code show up. This was at the height of NES pirating as well as video rentals, and so Nintendo experimented with an anti-piracy, anti-rental technique, much in the same way older PC games did. Well, it's kind of neat in concept, it's not very specific and punishes the players renting the games more than the rental stores for carrying it. What's more is that this concept hasn't aged well. Where video games are being acquired more often through downloads rather than physical media, those have rightfully purchased the game digitally via Nintendo don't always have a means of obtaining this code without referring to a guide online. The Wii U version did have a copy of the manual, and on the very last page was a copy of the letter. So this is useful, yet the Switch version has no manual or mention of how to find this code at all. Startropics was also included on the NES Classic, and players with no knowledge of finding this letter will have no idea that they have to log on to the NES Classic website, where copies of the manuals are found, and that letter and secret code are revealed. It's just another frustration that this game gives players. It's a good idea, a good concept, but it tackles it in the wrong way, and it feels punishing for those that have rented the game in the past or have bought it online. The music in Startropics has a way of worming its way inside your brain. It's good, but it's repetitive, and by the end, it'll just become irritating. The game's soundtrack was composed by Yoshio Hirai, who is known for, well, Startropics. It was the only game that I could find that he had worked on, aside from its sequel, but more on that later. When I went to write this review, I could only think of maybe 3 songs in the game, but in actuality, there are a decent amount throughout the title. The problem is that these same tunes are used in abundance. There's only one world map song, one dungeon theme, one boss theme, and you'll hear them over and over again. Startropics has a great premise, it has nice graphics, and much of the gameplay can lead to enjoyment, but the trial and error based dungeon exploration, the punishing deaths, the clunky controls, all of this may have been forgivable in 1990, but 30 years later, that doesn't sit right. That's why I'm awarding this game the label of trash. For those who are venturing into the world of Startropics for the first time, I recommend packing a sizable dose of medicine in your bag for this trip, because your stomach will turn sour at some point. For traditionalists too, I imagine a lot of frustration due to how deaths work in this game. That's why I have no shame in recommending using the save state features on the NES Classic and the Switch when playing this title. It may feel like cheesing through a very difficult game, but for many, I expect that that's the only way enjoyment can outweigh the anger. I hate to say it, but today, most gamers have too much to do to put up with these archaic structures. It should be stated that Startropics, despite being virtually passed over by audiences when it released, received a sequel by the name of Zoda's Revenge, Startropics 2. The game promised to correct the issues of the original title and appeal to a broader audience, and it did just that by releasing in 1994 on the NES. Yes, this game came out the same year as Mortal Kombat 2, Donkey Kong Country, Earthworm Jim, and Final Fantasy III. Only on the previous console. Nintendo would only publish 2 more titles for the NES, Mario's Time Machine and Wario's Woods, both of which would also become available on the Super Nintendo. Looking back, it's no wonder that this series has become forgotten. I would recommend for most gamers to stay away, because you'll get far too frustrated to complete it. Others, you might find enjoyment, but make sure to have a second controller just in case you end up breaking the first one. Anyway, here's Wonderwall.